you like to see emerging in the Middle East?
I would like to see emerging political party systems that are open for transparency, that are open for change. I would like to see political parties emerge that are responsible to the people, and governments that are responsible for the people. There is a huge change that has been happening in the Middle East lately, where people are fed up. I mean, they're fed up with what's going on. They're fed up with these governments that have been kowtowing to the West for a long time, and therefore these governments need to be held accountable. So what I think needs to be changed are governments that are open to multi-party elections, that are accountable to the people, and that are afraid of the people. That's what I want to be seen. I also want to see countries that emerge that aren't so overly dependent on other powers for support. They need absolute, how can I say, they need absolute, well, legitimization that comes from within and not from without.
And what role the Western countries and the United States should be playing in the Middle East?
The rules that should be, well, the roles that they should be playing, Western powers, the United States, Europe, etc. Well, for one, I think they should back out of the government. I think they should be backing out of this close relationship that they have with a lot of these regimes that are seen as very, very authoritarian. If anything, these governments should support investment in these countries. They should support business initiatives that give people jobs, so people don't need to be angry that they can't find a good, decent living. So I believe that there needs to be some more investment, quality investment, company investment. There needs to be more of that. But as far as meddling in the political affairs of these countries, no, I think they should absolutely stay out. Gentle political support, of course, diplomatic support, but in basically determining what these countries should say or do, no, I don't think they should do that.
But how do you see the intervention in Libya nowadays? The Americans, the Europeans, and now NATO,
Right.
they are attacking Gaddafi's regime, or they are collateral damage, huge collateral damage.
Right. And this is where my heart is really torn. As much as I want Gaddafi out, and I do want him out, the West needs to stay out in some way, because the West bears a responsibility in some of this. No one's disputing the fact that Gaddafi is a good person. He's not. He's clearly a jerk. He's clearly an authoritarian leader who's not afraid to use violence to repress his people. So at one part, I'm very happy that the NATO bombs were falling on the Gaddafi forces and saving Benghazi from probably a very horrible, horrible massacre that could have occurred. And at the same time, I want this rebellion, this civil war, whatever you want to call it, whatever we're going to define it as, it needs to be done by Libyans. It needs to be a Libyan challenge to the Gaddafi regime, because the United States, NATO, France, Britain, Canada, they can't afford to just be continually meddling in these countries. It needs to be done internally. And as much as, in my heart, I would love to see more bombs and Tomahawk missiles fall on those Gaddafi forces, there's going to be civilians who are going to die. And this is something that should be largely out of the hands of the West. This should be something that should be part of a Libyan struggle for greater rights, whatever that may be. I mean, I really genuinely hope that Libya turns into a multi-party democracy, but it needs to be done by the Libyans. It can't be imposed by the West.
Do you think the current emerging regimes, the current shape of the Middle East, will be in favor of American administration, or favor of Israeli existence in the Middle East, or it will be completely taking the contrast of that?
If the governments that emerge in the Middle East are not always supportive of American actions or Western actions, or even of Israel's existence, or or even supportive of Israeli policies, we should learn to accept that those are their needs, that's their political ideas. For instance, Brazil has taken a very different view towards this whole crisis, and they have, said, we don't necessarily agree with you all the time. It doesn't mean that these countries can't cooperate and can't have diplomatic relations. And I think that whatever emerging governments do come out of the Middle East, we should just accept their political opinions. I mean, of course, we can have a constructive dialogue and there can be disagreements, but there needs to be a recognition that not everyone's going to agree on the same thing. And so, if anything, the U.S. or other NATO Western allies should learn to know that not everyone's going to be on the same page.
How do you think the role of Muslim Brotherhood? Are they a real threat to the democratic process?
This is the hard one because the Muslim Brotherhood has been around for decades. I mean, they are one of the oldest political organizations in Egypt, and their experience in active political government has been, I believe, very, very limited. So the hard part is, how do you get an organization like that into a responsible government that's not going to turn authoritarian? How do you do that? And I don't have a question for that. I don't know. I do hope that whatever institutions that do come out of this will perhaps maybe force a policy of, well, maybe we should reform our beliefs. I mean, look at Germany. The SPD was a very Marxist party. It was a very left-wing party for a long time, and it made policymakers in the West very jittery until about 1959 when they changed their policy directive and they became much more moderate. And today, no one would ever think of the SPD being this very radical party that wants this radical economic political agenda on Germany. I mean, that's a joke now. But it took the institutions in Germany at that time, after the end of the World War II, to make that change. So perhaps, who knows, in my heart of hearts, I hope that whatever political situation does emerge out of Egypt, that maybe the radicalism of the Muslim Brotherhood can be toned down by the institutions that are surrounding them. They need to meet their constituents, and if their constituents don't think that, or if their constituents think that the radicalism is hurting them, then they'll tone down the rhetoric because, they need to be an accountable political party, and that requires votes.
So what's your hopes, fears for the Middle East and for the Mediterranean people?
My fears are that, well, for one, I fear that people like Gaddafi will continue to be in power. I fear that, and I feel also, that perhaps maybe some people are not always going to be in agreement to what governments will come out of this, and this will perhaps create counter-revolutions to the ones that we've already seen. So I fear that, maybe elements of the military or maybe more radical religious elements will probably or may disagree with this and cause further strife. My hopes, though, is that whatever positive thing will come out, it will be a multi-party democratic system that will come out of the Middle East, and for all the countries. I want that to happen. But it doesn't need to be imposed by the West. I mean, of course, the West can give support. I mean, that would be great, emotional and diplomatic support, but it can't be imposed. It needs to be done by people from the Middle East. The Mediterranean peoples need to have accountable governments where people can go to sleep at night and not have to worry about the secret police knocking on their doors. Because, a democratic system, that wouldn't happen, especially governments that are accountable to people. That wouldn't happen. So that's my hope. I want governments and people to live in a coexistence where governments are frightened of the people. They're frightened of the power that they might have, because power rests in the people. And that power should be in the ballot box, not by the butt of a gun. My fear is that this will be basically, I fear counter-revolutions.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.